Back in 2016, the big thrust, or at least one of the main talking points made by Brexiteers, that Brexit was all about trade. But we've been through this argument many, many times before. Brexit was about trade until it wasn't about trade, and then it was about sovereignty. And then it wasn't about sovereignty, it was about something else. It was about taking back control. And it would just be a very malleable piece of clay. And that's part of the problems really why Brexit turned out to be such a mess, because no Brexiteer actually really wanted to put Brexit into, shall we say, the oven and then pull out the true Brexit that they really wanted, which was this Singaporean on Thames style economy that no one really wanted. I mean, just look at what happened when Liz Truss took control. But the other big thing that happened back in 2019 was, of course, when Boris Johnson came in, and he removed the whip of about 21 other very pro-European Conservative MPs. And we always said eventually these MPs could do a lot more damage to certainly Boris and any sort of pro-Brexit movement out of the party being in the wider Conservative Party than actually in the Conservative Party itself. And we are now starting to see that happen, that they were just biding their time, waiting for their chance to strike. And it certainly seems that now these sort of former Conservative MPs are now starting to take action, and they are starting to hit hard on Brexit. So this is a really positive step forward for us in this way. So we're going to go over a piece by David Gauck, who was one of these, Conservative MPs who had their whip removed, and what his view of all this really has been. And one interesting thing, certainly, that is becoming very true, and the message they're trying to send, certainly to the Conservative Party at large, was that these trade deals were not done because they were an actual benefit to the UK. They were more done as a shiny PR piece so that Liz Truss could, well, look good to the wider sort of Conservative membership and even the UK public at large, to make her think that, well, oh, maybe Liz Truss, would be a good prime minister. After all, she got all these trade deals done. Well, as we've said before, trade deals take time. And even just this week, we've had George Eustice come out and say, yeah, these trade deals, not very good. So, interesting things are happening. Very interesting things are happening at the moment indeed. So, before we go diving into this, please do remember to that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, buy me coffee. And of course, there's the YouTube thank you button below as well, and YouTube subscription called the Pony Club, also down below as well. And if you join that, you get all sorts of stuff when you sign up to that. So, on with the story today. So this comes from the New Statesman with the title of "The Brexiteers' Trade Delusions Have Been Exposed." We knew the deals with Australia and New Zealand were of little economic value. They were a PR exercise for Liz Truss. Trade deals, that was the exciting opportunity that was supposed to be created by Brexit. Free from having to pander to the protectionist interests of southern Europeans, the UK would be free to strike valuable trade agreements with fast-growing countries around the world. Brexit would make us richer and more global. That was the relatively late entry into the list of arguments for leaving the European Union. The long-standing economic argument was that the EU regulations on the environment and the employment protections were holding us back. But these were not arguments that anyone wanted to make during the referendum campaign, especially as the target voters were not dogmatic free marketeers. Nor was this freedom to make trade deals the most prominent argument. Immigration and the 350 million a week for the NHS were much more important. But it was certainly the one that Brexiteer Tory MPs took seriously. Even Theresa May felt that a proper Brexit required the ability to enter into trade deals with third countries and immediately establish the Department for International Trade. In doing so, the chances of remaining in the EU's customs union were all but doomed. Slowly, too slowly, the difficulties that followed from leaving the customs union, including the additional frictions and trading with the EU, became clear. And the biggest problem was Northern Ireland. An independent trade policy for the UK meant a border between Britain and Ireland. And in the EU, it had to be placed somewhere. This was the issue that stood in the way of May getting a Brexit deal. She found a solution, but it essentially meant that she would be unable to complete the free trade deals with third countries until a solution to the Northern Ireland border had been found. This looked from an economically rational perspective. Even at the time, it was obvious that this was not a great sacrifice. And this was evident from the ministers that there was the upside of these deals was small. The cross-Whitehall analysis showed that the trade deals with the US would be worth an additional 0.1% to 0.3% of the GDP. And if we did the deals with another 22 countries, this included China, India, Australia, and New Zealand, this would be worth around 0.1% to 0.4% of the GDP. Put in contrast to a loss of over 4% of the GDP from Brexit, and even more if we left without any kind of deals. These were not huge prizes. But no, we must have a trade deals straight away, said the Tory Spartans. May's compromise was voted down, and then Prime Minister Boris Johnson flirted with the no deal and agreed to a border in the Irish Sea, but the UK would have the ability to enter into free trade deals. So, how exactly is that going? We have given up on the deal with the US. A deal with China is out of the question, as Conservative MPs would strongly oppose it. Negotiations with India have run into trouble because the key issue, as it was always destined to be, is immigration. But we do have deals with Australia and New Zealand. And yesterday, we learned the Environmental Secretary at the time that these deals were complete, and the staunch Brexiteer George Eustace honestly thought about them. He said the Australian deal is not actually a very good trade deal for the UK, he told the House of Commons. And bear that in mind, you've got a staunch, absolute Brexiteer right from the beginning, not a convert coming out and saying, yeah, these Brexit deals aren't very good. But remember at the time when we were covering these initial trade deals, it was George Eustace and Liz Truss who were having the Barney behind the back doors. And obviously, it turned out that George Eustace wasn't very happy with what Liz Truss was signing up to. But anyway, we continue. He also went on to say, we do not actually need to give Australia nor New Zealand the full liberalisation of beef and sheep. It was not in our economic interest to do so, and neither Australia nor New Zealand had anything to offer in return for such a grand concession. So he added that the reasons for these concessions was to make the Trade Secretary at the time, Liz Truss, took a decision to set an arbitrary target to conclude it by the G7 from the moment we were on the back foot. Because the clause in the Australian deal, according to Eustace, is the final one which gives the UK government an unbridled right to terminate and regulate the deal at any time with just 6 months' notice. So that's a shocking admission. That's a very shocking admission for that one. It is also the extraordinary criticism of government policy. A deal that was rushed for PR reasons and brought little to no economic benefit, and certainly at the cost to the farming sector. Truss and Johnson, who sided with her, argued that the content of the EU that we should leave the deal even if the economic consequences were calamitous. In the context, there were almost meaningless free trade deals with Australia and New Zealand that they rolled over. In truth, none of this comes as a much a surprise to anyone who has been following this closely. We knew the Australia and New Zealand deals were of little economic value, and the purpose was to no further the ambitions of Truss and give the government something meaningfully positive to say about Brexit. There are two lessons to be learned, however. The first is that these trade deals need proper scrutiny with credible assessments of their economic value. The second is even more important. At some point, we are going to have to re-examine our relationship with the EU. And in doing so, we need to be realistic about the benefits of having an independent trade policy and the costs in terms of friction in trade with the EU and problems over Northern Ireland. And this involves, we should not, and Northern Ireland that all this involves. And this is what we've been talking about since the very beginning. You need to have a serious conversation about this, and it's not happened. All the way back since 2016, this conversation has not been allowed to happen. So anyway, let's finish this off. We should try and determine our relationship with the EU is on the basis of these realities, not on the discredited fantasies of Brexiteers. So that is really the fight now, I think. Certainly in probably the next coming parliaments, is I think you're going to see the voices around this and about Brexit being talked about, the fact that it's being brought up in select committees, and the fact, you may remember just a couple of weeks ago we saw the last week when we looked at the banks one, and the Labour MP brought it up because she knew she could bring it up because there weren't Brexiteers in the room. That's even more interesting that they're worried about bringing this up in front of Brexiteers. But eventually, I think the message is going to be you just have so much ammunition now, and Brexiteers have nothing to fire back. They've got these deluded fantasies that they've clung onto for so long, and they actually haven't got anything concrete to throw back. And now, even more so, you've got people like David Cook, you've got all the sorts of people who were very, very much pro European Conservative MPs, not in the parliamentary party, but in the non larger parliamentary party, who are going to start making waves because we can already see the arguments for rejoining the customs union and the single market are starting to be advanced. And slowly but surely, as we always said, back to 2016, that would be our path to going back to rejoining the EU. So it's already there. It's already there. And I think that the price of these trade deals certainly is going to be revisited. I wouldn't be surprised if Labour were to make them a big issue at the next sort of general election. That will be kind of interesting to do. But we'll see, of course, what happens there. But also, we need to see this happening on the Labour side as well, because we know that the Labour Party has been very, very much silent on this issue, and I wish someone would actually start to stand up and start to talk about these issues. But it needs to happen, and this conversation is a very, very much needed one, and you cannot keep on putting this off. You just cannot. You know, as we've talked about before, Brexit is the elephant in the room that not a lot of people, shockingly, want to talk about. But there are voices starting to make their sound. Maybe not in Parliament at the moment. Or, well, just, shall we say, there's maybe some murmurings going on, shall we say, in the halls of Westminster about Brexit. But certainly, outside of Westminster, those voices, like this one, are going to be getting even louder. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, we'll see you all next time.